already, and selfishly, I'm pretty proud of it without having gotten started. It's episode 52. So this is one full year by the time this releases. So a little while back, Lucas and I, well, a little bit over a year ago, sat down in my basement. I call it the library. That's where we're at every day for these recordings, and talking about, hey, we want to be somewhere in a year, and let's start talking to some new folks and see if we can get smarter and help those that listen or that we know, help them get better as well. So want to have someone completely different on today that we haven't had before. We don't really talk to people in the fighting world, and there's a lot more reasons to, but we have Kyle Maynard on today. So for our first 1 year anniversary episode. So I'm looking at his bio, and he played football 6th through 8th grade, and I'm like, okay, that's good. Wrestled 6th grade and then into college. So I'm like, all right, college athlete, that's pretty sweet. Weightlifting, I like that. Butterfly press, 240 pounds for 23 reps. So we're going to get into what that exactly is, because that's not something typically we talk about. I'm like, all right, so that's cooler, right? Then I get into mountaineering. All right, so he's in Africa, climbs Mount Kilimanjaro. It's over 19,000 feet. And then heads over to some point to Argentina. I want to make sure I say this correctly. Aconcagua?
Aconcagua. Yeah, pretty close.
That's almost 23,000 feet. I'm like, all right, well, that's, even cooler. Then I see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, competed in the 2015 World Championships. I'm like, all right, that's cool. And then I find out publishes his own book, wrote it in his dorm room, if that's right. No Excuses is his philosophy, so that's the name of the book. It ends up being a New York Times bestseller. Go from there, he ESPN puts together a documentary of this guy. He ends up winning an ESPY, of all things, 2004. I'm like, this is even cooler, right? And then I'm looking at all these things, and I'm like, he's doing all these things, and he's a congenital amputee. Means his arms end basically where his elbows are, and his legs essentially end where the knees are, roughly. So he's accomplished all these things while having those little challenges along the way. And I use the word little because he makes them little. They're huge for anybody. And fast forward to 2024, and we got Kyle Maynard on. So quite the accomplished guy, quite the dude. And like we were talking before, he's a just straight up doer. And so Kyle, man, great to have you on the show, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jim. No, it's a pleasure. I know my buddy Jeff Gum did an episode with you too, so that was I think how the introduction came to be. But yeah, talk about another amazing individual too. So I know you're in good company with a lot of the guests you have.
We've been blessed. Lucas has brought guys on. I brought some guys on, but the people we brought on, male or female, they say, hey, man, you should have this other guy on. And selfishly, I ask all our guests, like, hey, who else should we have on here? And they make a good referral, and we call them up, or you call them up and say, hey, why don't you go on Jim and Lucas's show? And they say yes. And I'm like, cool. Larry King says he's an inspiration you will not soon forget. And then Oprah says he makes you want to be a better, truer version of who you are. And I was watching his documentary. It's like about 90 minutes long. I'm just a little past the halfway point. And I'm like, dang, like, really? Like, dang, So, Kyle, anywhere you want to go today? Anything you want to get into? Like, because you've done tons. I forgot that you ran your own CrossFit gym 10 years, right? Like, it seems like everything you could possibly be doing physically, you've given a shot at.
Yeah, which is wild to think about. To give your audience a little bit more perspective, so I was born a quad amputee. Basically means my arms end at the elbows and legs end at the knees. And so never used prosthetics as a kid, but I tried them. They just didn't really work out too well. But just was able to, adapt and figure things out. And I think as a kid, there was a ton of concern too, and just different ways of, would I be able to do this? Would I be able to do that? So it's one of those, it's a weird thing, like to hear people, rattle off a bio of you. It's, it's like, wow, yeah, all of those things like have happened. I've gotten to go and experience a lot. Like there's things that have happened and occurred that I've forgotten about. I mean, even it's been a long time since I've talked to about a lot of the stuff. I sold the CrossFit gym years ago, and I was kind of like my weightlifting history and background before it was, competing in jiu-jitsu heavily, like, like was kind of like a big aspect of like the, my sales pitch and in conversations that would come up all the time. And now, for years I haven't owned the gym, and uh, now it doesn't come up nearly as often. So I figured that it'd be cool to go into a little bit of that today. And I know we have some like mutual connections too, probably in that world as well. I think we brought up Louis Simmons, Westside Barbell, and some of those people
For
too.
sure.
Talk about some strong individuals.
Sure.
That was just insane being around that environment. Um, Probably mutual friends in the CrossFit world too. I know you've been involved with that as well. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
I'm sure we've probably crossed a lot of the same similar
for
paths.
sure. For sure. Yeah, I didn't even mention 20 plus years motivational speaker. And what I find is, me included, people get excited or enamored, or they just admire other doers, people that overcome the obstacle, the whole Rocky story, the underdog story, if you will. And people say, well, he's missing these parts of his arms and legs, he's handicapped. And I'm like, well, what about all the rest of the planet that has all those mental handicaps that hold him back? Everybody has challenges and obstacles. It's just some people choose to learn and adapt and get going. Some just move right through them. Some don't give a shit. They just go right over the obstacle, right? And then some get beaten down right away, and they're like, "Hey, I got this thing, and I can't. I can't." It's already just built into their brain that they can't. So one of the first questions I had is that I try to empathize or sympathize and put myself in someone else's shoes and try to figure out, man, what's life like? And I'm watching the documentary. I'm like, well, he's going grocery shopping, right? He's picking up stuff. Like, that seems pretty natural. Just seems to take a little longer. But even if I weren't doing that, when I find myself getting upset, it's because what I'll end up doing is I end up comparing myself or where I think I should be, or I'll compare myself versus where someone else is. And I'll get frustrated and jealous, and then probably angry until I get mature enough. And at almost 50 years old, I've gotten a lot better. But I gotta, wonder at some point, that's got to be a huge thing. That if I can not compare myself to where I thought I could be of this and that, if I take that out of the equation, then I'm not holding myself back. I can move forward. So can you just speak to that frustration and what that was like until you're like, hey, you know what? No, I'm not letting that upset me. I'm just doing me. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think it's come in different forms and fashions over the years, since at different points in time. As an athlete, though, it's, a pretty obvious one. Had to go through a ton of losses. When I first started playing sports, being a quad amputee, right? Then it was like there's, a lot of a lot of doubt, as to whether or not I was ever going to be able to like succeed or compete at a high level. In wrestling, I lost my first 35 matches, like just over and over and over and over again for like a year and a half straight. And I'm certain that there's no way that I would have continued to do it had I not started winning that, like like I was at that like kind of like that breaking point, and I think it's the same thing too with with mountain climbing, years and years later, like the same trajectory, you know started with bath towels and duct tape around the ends of my arms and my feet. And then you're talking about climbing some of the highest mountains in the world, like Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Aconcagua. Like literally it was at a totally different, totally different ball game, totally different perspective. And there's no way that like my wheelchair or anything, could have taken me there. Like I had to go and find a way to get there to the summit myself. In wrestling, went 0-35 when I started, and by the time I was a senior in high school, was ranked as one of the top wrestlers in my weight class in the country. Beat several state champions, in the surrounding areas. Like, was going up against able-bodied kids and like, beating them consistently. Playing football, nose guard. Um, just take my helmet and smash some people's legs when I first started, and take them down. Like, that was where kind of all began. We used to do like Oklahoma drills, and like where you'd have like you'd have just like the center, and quarterback hands it off to the back comes through the line, center's blocking you, and it was just like me as a nose guard, trying to like shuck the center and try to make the tackle. And like, my coach used to have people like just run it and over and over and over again, where like I was smashing my helmet into their shins in the Oklahoma drills just to try to toughen them up,
Hmm.
and had other coaches that were amazing individuals too. That like my wrestling coach used to say like, when people would complain about like, if they were injured or something, and maybe they broke their wrist or ankle or something like that, and he would say, well, Kyle probably wishes he had a wrist or ankle to go and break.
Right. Powerful.
And it would usually shut him up pretty quick. But like, it's but we all have that though. We all have something, and that's a big part of the lesson that my family taught me too as a kid growing up, was just the fact that like everybody's got something. Everybody's got, you don't know what somebody else is going through. You don't know what their deal is necessarily, and you can't always assume. Um, Sometimes it's just people that go into that like victim mentality and need to snap out of it. Other times it's other stuff, right? Like I know you've got the background in the financial services
Mhm.
world. Talk about like a super competitive, hyper competitive kind of like environment where different people, that's over the years with like the public speaking probably been my biggest like client base. Just various types of bankers and insurance companies, all kinds of stuff, where it's like, relationship building, but difficult to like differentiate, difficult to go and like have some sort of like, thing that makes, you uniquely you, like you kind of are that product. And much in the same way too, like I think that like, public speaking or running a gym has kind of been the same thing. So it's, but yeah, I think along the way, I know you talk a lot about like Sisu too, right? Like, and like the kind of just being and that unbreakable mind, that like unbreakable like spirit, the indomitable will, like instilling that in people. Like I love, Lucas's like the banner behind him, when weak things break, like there's truth in all of that. Like Mark Ripito used to say, stronger people are harder to kill. Like people that are like, working on that like themselves like continually, I think they're gonna, reach a different place. And it just shows up in all kinds of stuff, my family too. I give them a ton of credit for so much of what's gotten me to here. I think like they you know I think they knew very early on that they had to like I had to go through and had to endure the struggle.
Gotcha.
And I think if they had you know made things easier for me in different kinds of ways, I think that it would have been a very different struggle at some point. Like the struggle in life, it's going to hit you no matter what. It's going to hit you, at different points, no matter what. Can't avoid it. So I think it's better to like, prepare to like have that strength and that, prepare your spirit for those points in time in which you are going to go and meet that point.
You know, Man, so many takeaways there. The I find that the uniqueness that you have isn't necessarily well, there's definitely the uniqueness of missing parts of your arms and legs, right? But I find the uniqueness really is that from an early on age, you're like, hey, I'm moving forward. I don't care. I'm all in. I'm pushing through, and that's not common. The average person, like you walk around the street or up and down the stores, or whatever, you see that they're most of the country's unhealthy, right? You see a lot of victim mentality and a lot of people that small little setbacks and they're derailed. Like there's plenty of people that have any other type of challenges and they're like, they break from that. So my next question was, where does that drive come from? Is it what the whole family is about that you grew up in? Or was it your parents saying, hey, we're still pushing? Or was it just internal? Is it a combination? It comes down to the classic nature versus nurture or a combination of both, right? So where does that drive to not to, I think it's achievement to be able to do what you do given the challenges you have, right? But then it's like, yeah, I'm climbing the tallest mountains. I'm gonna fight jujitsu's national tournament, and I'm gonna train at Westside Barbell, and I'm gonna be nationally ranked in wrestling, and then public speaker for 20 years after I ran the gym for 10. So where does that drive and that identity come from? Is it built? Was it nurtured, or was it just born that way, or was it both?
It's hard to, I mean, I'm of the mind, I think that it's both. I think that, you know, fortunate with the environment that I was born into for sure. And that's something a lot of people can't control. There are a lot of people that are listening to this, not a lot necessarily. I mean, I don't know necessarily like all of your, but a lot of people that certainly know other people that like can't control the environments that they're born into. Everybody knows that, like somebody they can go and think of that is, deep down a good person that just was born into, hard circumstances. And sometimes you see people fight through and succeed on the other end of that, and other times I think people struggle. Um, and I think that for me, the environment was, like my parents had a good balance of both, like kind of like the hard and the soft, right? Like they had the good perspective of understanding things that, when I needed to go and struggle, whether it was like picking up a spoon or a fork and dropping it, hundreds of times, thousands of times, maybe even, just repeatedly to go and figure out how to go and use it. Then, they watched me go through that struggle, and it was tough too, especially for my mom. She said that, it was a mom, she would have helped feed me forever, and that she wanted to go in and like, do it for me. But, I think that they knew that I had to, figure out how to do it on my own. Otherwise, there's going to come that time when they going to be there. They weren't going to be there to go and do it for me. Whether it was, if you imagine like, in like a, date, like one of my first big, I didn't date a whole lot in high school, but after in college years and beyond, but, like I, the dating life would have been dramatically different had I, been required to have somebody like as an attendant, like feed me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and that's just a simple thing that like most people don't necessarily have to go through and go and endure, but as parents they did, and me as a kid that I had to figure out how to go and do it. But the wild part is I think it became so natural and so normal that later on I was able to kind of learn how to like just learn how to like to deal with not only that but with a lot of other stuff, like you said. I mean, whether it was, grocery shopping or, things of that nature, I had to figure out how to like how to make a lot of stuff work. And they did, and I'm grateful that that I've had that background. As I said earlier, you don't necessarily know what's on the horizon, right? You don't know what's going to be like, out there that's going to be that thing that's going to go and be difficult for you. Right now, this year, candidly, has been probably the toughest year of my life, even beyond anything I had faced previous. Um, Dealt with a traumatic brain injury of unknown origin. And I know you guys in the sports performance world know I'd been around it, before. I'd been around like and heard about like brain injury stuff. Never really, would have never thought that I would be dealing with one. And yeah, it's kind of like been recurrent now in a couple different instances, and I notice like when it hits, then it's like everything changes. It's hard to describe. It's literally like, like equivalent to like the not having arms and legs, but inside of my head and mood and brain and like just even ability to like think and relate, all that. It kind of set that resolve that no matter what happens in the next chapter of life, I think that like I'm just gonna have to, put my head down and fight through as hard as I possibly can to give it everything that I have to try to, try to pull through. And who knows? I mean, in 5 to 10 years from now, like you had in the questionnaire sheet too that you sent. I love that. Like, I don't really have a good answer for what life's going to be like in 5 to 10 years. I think a lot of it's kind of dependent on there's just so many unknown factors right now and so many different levels.
And that's okay. One thing I wanted to really praise is those parents making those very courageous decisions, and those parents of yours. And why I say that is about a week ago, I'm at the Chamber of Commerce, and they're going around and they're asking, hey, why do you guys do what you do? And this definitely not about me. It's about your parents. And I said I try to get people better mentally and physically so they can handle mental and physical challenges, so they can create the best version of themselves. And that some of the other members, they came at me and they asked, like, well, I just want to help my kid all the time and help them do this and help them do that. And I said, yes, and I do too. Like a great example is you can tie their shoes for them their entire life. They never know how to do it. Fine. You could teach them how to tie their shoes and they can do it the rest of their lives. Fine. What if you just threw the shoe at them and said, figure it out? At some point, 1,000 iterations later, they would have their shoes tied. They can do it the rest of their life. And they have the creativity built in their head now that they can actually create something from nothing, right? So those parents, like your parents, that had to love you a little bit more than do the things for you. And here's why I say that. When I do something for my kid or my wife or a friend or Lucas, I help them out. They feel better. They're happier. I've had this internal joy for giving them to them or making them feel better. I'm like, hey, I helped you out. I took you to this game. I paid for your college, blah, blah, blah. I'm giving this to you. You feel good, so I feel good about that. When my kid is hurting, when your friend is hurting, then you feel that hurt, right? And when you do those nice things for them, yeah, you do that for them, takes away their hurt, but you're also taking away your own hurt because you don't feel it anymore, right? That's a little selfish, essentially, a little bit. And then you create that dependency where that person, that spouse, that kid, well, I need this for my mom. I need them help with my homework every night. And it's like, yeah, you wanted to help them some, but then you're also taking away their ability to handle pain, mental and physical challenges. And that's not what we're asked to do. So your parents that did that, amazing courage. Your sisters too, right? So that's awesome. That was the environment. Hey, we're going to help build this guy. The other part that I think is kind of the shtick of this show and what we're putting out here is that we believe that there's essentially a solution for everything. And the solution might be 2 or 3 steps, or it might be 2 or 3,000 steps, but there's going to be a solution for just about everything, not infinite, right? For just about anything, there's going to be some kind of solution. And it just takes another iteration. So when you tell me 1,000 steps to pick up a spoon, fuck, right? That sounds annoying. But now we still have the process now, right? There's a process. That's what we're trying to do here. Find processes for building better athletes on their training, their nutrition. And now you have another challenge with a TBI. It sounds like you're going to have to work out a bunch of more processes for all these different scenarios. So if you have 10 different painful scenarios when you have like an episode, you can probably have to do 100 different iterations of all 10 of those, which is 1,000 now, so they can figure out the one process for each of the 10. And then when number 3 shows up, you do this process just so you can handle the day. And that sucks, but that's everything, right? That's everything. There's a process for going upstairs and making your food and your laundry and doing your taxes. So it's just then figuring out the next process. And you're like, well, shit, I'm tired of doing this shit, but there's no way around it, right? What are you going to do? Check out? You can't do that. So you still got to keep going, right? The whole Sisu thing, like you just said. So,
there's also too, yeah, to that point, it's I love where you're going with this too. It's like I think what comes up to me and what you're saying, it's and what I'm kind of realizing too is like, the firm foundation of everything that I've experienced to this point in life is absolutely still there, even though, lately there's been this totally like unexpected, wild left hook. And yet simultaneously, it's I don't know. I don't want to fall in the trap too of thinking it could be a lot easier than I'm anticipating. But it could also not be. And I think that like sometimes, it's just, preparing for the unknown and the unknowables. That was one of my favorite things about CrossFit when I first found it was, like I was looking for all of these different like fitness modalities and what different people used. And I think the thing that like attracted me most to CrossFit was the fact that like Greg Glassman's belief, the CrossFit founder, he said like, training people for the unknown and the unknowable.
Right.
Whether it's a grandparent that's got to go and carry a bag of dog food up a flight of stairs, 3 stories, whether it's could be an athlete that's training for their sport, or it could be a special, forces operator that's dropped off in the middle of the desert and that's got to go and, ruck, several hundred miles to go and save their life. And it's like, or their friend's life or something, right? Like there's some kind of like something's gone wrong and you got to go and figure out how to go and deal with it. Like, but you can't train for those situations. You can't train for those things that you don't necessarily know about, right? So the genuine like truth is to be like an explorer, to be somebody who's like got, like rich in that mindset and heart and spirit. And I think that, I can say I love about you guys and what you're doing and what you're sharing, and I know that we're on a very similar path and similar mission to this, is the fact that like you are that explorer and like, you embody that. And I think that like it's a weird kind of place to be in too, because we kind of know intuitively, I think for the most part, living in Western civilization, the fact that most things have been explored. There's not like going to be like a huge wild frontier where we're like, all right, we're the new like Magellan or something, right? Or, it,
Well,
but the thing, but the spirit, I think, of those people is very much still available to us. And it's available to everybody in different kinds of ways and different kinds of doses, depending on what they're capable of, taking on. And it's, I think, the dose dependent aspect of what individuals are, really, what, that's what it comes down to that, that dose of what can you handle and what do you need to go and like figure out. And for me, I know for sure all of the things that I've faced in life, everything that I've, experienced, everything that I've endured, all of the things that I've, that brought me to here have very much laid a firm foundation and kind of like paved that way for whatever happens next. I have no idea what's going to go and happen next, and I've kind of like come to that resolve that like good, bad, indifferent, whatever happens, I mean, just to wake up for a day, just to wake up for a day and to be able to go and see the light of day, and to be able to like just, enjoy with like, something about the day. You may have had a super shitty day,
right.
but there's something you can enjoy about it. There's something that's like probably really good that happened as a consequence of, whatever it is that, I mean, there's some days recently that like I've had where I'm like, that, I've had to really like think about it. And I'm like, even if it's playing with my parents' puppies, like they've got, 2 Cocker Spaniel puppies and my sister's got a golden retriever that's, that's here. My other sister, when she brings her dog over, it's like it's a madhouse. But like, they got chickens, and we got dogs. I'm sitting on this like beautiful, 27 acres, out in the middle of nowhere. It's like there's some things, there that I can be grateful for. But I also too want to be authentic and straight up with with your audience and with you guys to go and say that like even as public speaker and all those things, I don't know if that's going to be the future of what ever happens with me and whatever I take on next. But B, a message that I always try to go and share is the fact of like no excuses is kind of like my main messaging. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't going to like complain or make excuses or whine or all of those things. I mean, it's an aspect of it. It's a human nature. It's a human side of everything. And I've seen so many speakers too that you think are like holier than thou, that are like high and mighty. They walk off stage and either they're the nicest person in the world or complete douchebags. And you don't necessarily know what you're going to go and get.
Right.
I think it's so hilarious that like some people are super authentic and you can tell that like they're real. Some people I've met that are like the most fantastic like speaker on the outside, and then they're wild introverts on the inside. You don't necessarily, it's hard to tell. It's hard to go engage, but everybody's got something. Everybody has something that they've got to go and endure. That's going to go and like figure out like that we're going to have to go and face. It's part of life. It's my grandmother who was everything to me. Um, and like she she was the one that, for like powerful lessons. Like, so she taught me the lesson of like just shaking people's hands and looking people in the eye. And she said that when people hear your voice and they see your face and they shake your hand, the disability will go and fade away. And she used to take me with her in grocery stores, and we would go shopping. And I'd be sitting in the front seat of the cart, and we'd go up and down the aisles of the grocery store and just practice meeting people along the way. And she would always say that she'd just shake their hand, and they'll totally forget about the disability. And it kind of became true, But she ended up passing from a brain tumor.
Mm.
Talk about traumatic brain injury, compared to a stage 4 glioblastoma brain tumor, where it was just, man, that was, just seeing like what she had to go through and endure before she passed. It was, it was wild, but she never lost her heart and her spirit. Like, it was always there, even in the last second, where I remember the last time I saw her, actually, she passed 3 days after my birthday. My birthday's March 24th, but I went to go and see her. Um, I think it was on my birthday or either the day after. It was right before she passed, and we didn't know when it was going to happen, but we knew it was going to happen at some point. And it took her, everything in her to go and like, she was semi like, I just like out of it, like just like squeeze my arm, but the whole time, the whole visit that I was there, she was there squeezing my arm,
Mm-hmm.
squeezing my hand, and like I was like, that's all that I needed. That's all I needed to know that, for her, that was like, you know, the equivalent, I'm sure, of, the same, the day that you told me that you were carrying 800 pounds, it's a 800-pound backpack, right? With your build, like you said, like 1,100 pounds each foot, with each step, like, for her just to go and squeeze my hand in that way, I think was, very much the same.
Man, number of things there. One, you say you can't really prepare for the unknowable, but yes and no. You don't know what's going to actually happen. Like, one of my favorite things in the gym is when one of my newer athletes, some soccer mom or dad, they've been there for a year or two, they come in and they're terrified, right? But after a couple of years, they don't even care what the programming is. They just come in, hey, this is what we're doing. All right, cool. They're not worried. They don't have the can I do this anymore. They're just like, all right, this is what's next. Totally unfazed. I can do this. Here's how I'm going to attack it, right? So if you didn't have all the challenges for the last 30 plus years, then you might not be that really prepared to handle any kind of TBI challenge. But since you have, you can at least take some solace in the fact that I've handled every other thing that's been thrown at me. Well, shoot, this is just a Monday in September. It's just another day of stuff being thrown at me. It's one of the huge reasons why I like working with Lucas. Stuff keeps getting thrown at him and me because we take on more things and we keep handling it. Lucas gets more things and keeps handling it. The other thing is that with your grandmother holding your arm, right? My grandmother is everything to me. So she's passed away and gone, and there's still days, weeks, months, years later, there's an impact that's there. And those speeches that you gave and you can still give, or you can still show people that you're just not going to pack it in, there's still that impact. Just even if one person listens to this podcast, and I already messaged like 25 people that I'm good friends with or were already on the show to say, hey, I got this next guy coming up. Here's a little clip from his movie. They're like, oh shit, I need to see this. So you're making this impact before you pass, right? Which is one of the reasons why Lucas and I do what we do. And the third thing, like you said, weak things break. Yeah, there are these rules that a speaker or a coach or an athlete is going to be held and bound by, whether it's simple physics or the rule that weak things break. But physics and making yourself strong still has pain and adversity. Like, Jordan's getting his ass beat until he's strong enough to be able to handle everything. He has to put his body through more to get stronger so he can handle it. Same thing with Lucas. Like, he had to go through tremendous adversity with coaching in some schools. But now, like, when there's adversity at his current school, he's just like, it's just today. I'm going to handle it. Some of the parts are a little annoying. I'm going to be a little patient. But there's no like, I don't think I can do it because you've been through so much shit. Like the people that really are confident they can handle the problems, the hard part is that those people are broken and smashed on the inside enough times that they don't give a shit anymore and they can still handle it. So there's the sadness, hey, that person was broken and smashed. You feel bad for that person. But you also got to be envious and like, hey, man, that person's broken and smashed, but he came back. So that's awesome, right? Like, Lucas, you can talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, um, I always, when I talk to my athletes all the time, I always talk about, we were just talking about it. Me and one of the other coaches talking about it Friday at the football game was like, you know, reason why we're having success now over the last, we're having success this year and we're having across the board, not with just one particular team, but we're having success, with how kids behave and act and stuff like that is just because we talk about all the time. We've really made it hard for them. We've set a standard and we hold them accountable to that stuff. And you do that to the first group of people, the first group of kids that come through, and they don't really have a reference point to what you're talking about. So your standard is a little bit lower. Your standard isn't my standard. Our standard to school isn't as high as isn't as low as what it was, but quite frankly, we just couldn't have the high standards that we talked about when we first got here. We had to set the standard a little bit higher than what they could handle and guide them a little bit at a time to get them to where they need to be. And 4 years later, our kids can handle a lot more. They can go through a lot more. They can experience a lot more. Just because they've gone, especially those kids that have been here in the beginning, they can look back and see and understand. They have the experience of going through things, whether or not that's reps on the field, reps on the court, or reps in the weight room, going through enough, practices, enough weight room sessions, and enough experience to back that up. They can handle newer and harder things, and that's essentially what at the end of the day, it's kind of what my job is to prep them for one. Essentially, I mean, really, I'm to prep them for their sport, but really to kind of prep them in life in general and to make sure that they're able to handle what's going to be asked of them to do.
There's something that just came to mind when you were sharing that. I think it's called the curse of knowledge, and I think it's especially I think for people like us, right? Like that hunger, for that like type of knowledge. I think it's you forget a lot of the time that other people don't have the same foundation of knowledge and experience that you have, right? So when you're talking to other people and you oftentimes I think kind of like especially with I notice this a lot with high school athletes, right? For sure. It's like they're still in that like formative state where it's like they haven't had like a lot of those big like heartbreaks and setbacks and all of those things that have had to happen, and like just the people that you go and talk to and learn along the way, that there's probably something that you can learn from just about everybody, along the way. And like but I think kind of have to like experience those. You either have to experience those or you have to go out and like seek those things and learn from those things. And thankfully now there's so many resources that are available that weren't available even 15 years ago, right? That like that are available now where people can go and like you can constantly go and learn, plug in. And like I listen to a lot of like uh in the midst of a workout, right? Like sometimes I listen to music, but a lot of time I'll put on like a Joe Rogan podcast or something like that, and go and listen. I can learn something, from somebody that either somebody new that I've never heard of before, or I can go and learn something potentially from somebody that I've heard from a bunch that I've never heard them talk about before. So it's that's just I think a product of the fact of the time that we live in, and like you have to have that like that hunger and that desire. So a lot of times I think getting athletes to that point, you know, the younger the better, that they can go and take that in and learn that, and really like embrace it. I wish that like they taught that stuff in schools. Right? Like I've always thought that. Like I've always wished that. Like it just doesn't make sense to me that they don't like share just like how to think properly. You'd imagine that like that's a big aspect of
Learning.
what we yeah of just in general of growth development at any front or any level. But just how to think. Nobody nobody teaches you that. Yeah, and that should be like the first class that you get when you sign up for high school. And I think it's one that you should be taking the whole time through, throughout. Like if we just train people just in that alone, you see that like just the huge market that like podcasts and things like that have become as a consequence. Um, I think it's such an amazing avenue. Just to be able to learn and grow from others.
Yeah, I think it's for me. I speak for my where I'm at and what I'm doing and where I've been. We talked a little bit about like the victim mentality. I see a lot of kids that are coming up through junior high. And they're going through elementary school and they get through junior high. I feel it just seems as if everybody is spoon feeding a lot of this. I don't know. It could be a generational thing or an adult thing, but I really feel like a lot of the kids that are coming up that are, and I'll say athletes because that's who I deal with every day is athletes, and I feel like they are not taught to critically think or problem solve on their own. So when they get to me and they get to high school and they're put in a position to be responsible for themselves and responsible for their actions and responsible for being prepared when they've never had to do that, or when they go through something, they make a mistake, and then they have to handle or deal with the consequences. They don't know how, or they think it's unfair. And well, it's put the blame, pass the buck to somebody else. Well, nobody's really taught these kids how to handle that kind of stuff, or how to handle problems, or to critically think, or to solve problems on their own. And that's the biggest challenge I have, especially with the younger kids that come in, especially those freshmen. Is teaching them how to be responsible for their own actions and be responsible for being prepared, that kind of stuff. And it turns into this thing where the victim mentality really becomes a very prominent. You see it in a lot of the kids that are coming up is, well, they don't meet the standard, or they don't meet an expectation, or they don't come prepared, or they get in trouble. Well, then it's everybody else's fault. It's every other excuse other than their own responsibility. And trying to teach that, I run a weights class, but it's really, a responsibility class. It seems like is what it really is turned into. Nobody's teaching these kids how to critically think and problem solve. And for me, it's when I was in high school, nobody was really teaching me how to, I could kind of critically think and I can kind of problem solve, but I never had problems that big to where I had to really, think about how I'm going to figure this out and make a process for that. It wasn't until I was working, working at some of these other universities and schools until I figured that out, where, I've never been exposed to working 22-hour days and forcing myself to be functional. How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to get transportation? It wasn't until that stuff slapped me right in the face until I was like, okay, I've got to figure it out, or otherwise I ain't going to be able to do this thing that I want to do.
Right.
And our kids is, the world's hard to live in these days. Obviously, I think everybody is experiencing some sort of difficulty in some way. And the kids, they say they want this and they want that and they want opportunities. It's everybody's cramming down scholarships and offers. Everybody wants to play at the next level, but really nobody's. the message to some of these kids is not getting to them clearly that it's, there's a lot of things that have to happen first before you just get these things. And I'm speaking primarily where I'm at and what I do. But you can see it all over the place. So,
there's a movie, Dead Poet Society, came out early 90s. Takes place like, I don't know, 40s or 50s. And it's the same deal. Robin Williams is talking about free thinking, being your own individual person, whereas the school was preaching, hey, we want drones that are mindless and robotic. And it's still a pervasive, theme year after year, generation after generation. We're fighting against that. I think the other component is that when you're always comparing yourself, like that's why I led with that question about comparing yourself versus where you want to be or someone else. It robs you of all that joy. Well, people do that on social media all the time. They see, well, this person had this many likes or this many views. Kyle just said, hey, I'm speaking as the other speaker. I'm like, this person's a world-renowned speaker. I can't believe he has problems, right? When we ask these people at the end of these, our guests at the end of these podcasts, what's your favorite quote? I think the most popular one is the man in the arena. So it's the man in the arena that's trying, that's getting his ass beat, but still trying. It's okay to have losses. It's okay to fail as long as you're doing your best and trying to get better. You're going to get beaten. That's okay. Just keep moving forward. Right? It's not bad to get beat. It's okay. You're not going to be abandoned. All right. You're not going to be hated and loathed. You just keep pushing. And it's that resilience is what people find attractive. Not that, hey, you just win everything. They're like, oh, well, then they start hating you. So, Kyle, you've done a lot of things. You go 0-35 in wrestling, then you're kind of badass at wrestling. No one climbs 22,000 feet and essentially in a bear crawl. I don't want to speak for it. I don't. When I'm climbing, I got sticks in both hands, right, and a ton of water, and I'm whining, right. So there's that. You were awesome at that, and then you're in jiu-jitsu. Is there a favorite sport or a favorite season? Because you also did powerlifting at Westside Barbell of all places, for goodness sake, right? Or it's like, hey, I just like being physical and testing myself. Or it's like, man, I really I like this sport better. All these other ones are great. But is there a favorite by any chance?
I've been really fortunate with the fact of the Westside Barbell thing. Candidly, was just like it was just a brief visit, but like just in the short amount of time to go there to pick Louis' brain and like figure out like, hey, how can I use this or that or band work and different stuff. He recommended that I try out. Try to just. I think that's try to learn from as many of these people that I've been around as as I possibly can, and I think that's. I think philosophically I'm like way more of a generalist. Like I'm attracted, like to so many different things,
Okay.
to a lot of different things. And I think that like I've over the years loved all kinds of different stuff. As a kid, I was a huge basketball fan. I'm like a casual fan now. I'll watch some games. I don't really like watch like a ton. I watch more like NFL or college football. I think probably from a sport perspective. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, like I keep up with like pretty decently. A big esports fan, League of Legends, like like watching like those. I mean, this is phenomenal what they go and do. Like, and sometimes it's one of the ways that I just kind of like have learned to be able to like cope with kind of the current, aspect of my life of just like dealing with something like the downtime and space in between where I haven't been feeling great. To just like throw on like YouTube of or Twitch or like watching people like play video games. Never would have imagined that would have been a thing, but like I love it actually, and I think some of the esports athletes like take it extremely seriously, and it's fun to watch. So, but I think if I were to pick one thing though, if I had to pick one thing, I would say from a sporting experience that there's nothing that compared to training for the Jiu-Jitsu World Championships. So that was I moved out to San Diego, half like followed a girl, half just wanted to be in San Diego and train jiu-jitsu basically. I mean, it's one of the hotbeds of the world, and it was looking at New York, the Renzo Gracie Academy and John Danaher and some of the people there. or San Diego, and I think it came down to wheelchair accessibility. Just a lot more, like easier to be able to get around and navigate with a wheelchair out in San Diego. So I had an amazing time out there, but for the first 6 months that I was there, it was brutal, and I got my ass kicked every day, and I wanted it though too. I was around, I mean, everybody in the room was just, like a killer. Everybody there, but you wouldn't know it. I mean, they're some of the nicest people in the world, but like everybody there was like a very decorated, competitor, and you know, even if they weren't a black belt level competitor, they were like some of the purple belts and brown belts were so like renowned in their competition already that they were as up and comers, that they were already doing it as professionals. But some of the people that came out there too were like sleeping in stairwells to of like apartment complexes, to because they couldn't afford an apartment themselves until they go and get sponsored, and then can finally like take off and do it. And but that room taught me so much, I think, of just like it was probably the most dedicated I've ever been in my training. And it, like there was just days where I remember that were just so grueling that I would stare at my gi on the door and dread putting it on. But I also too, I would look at like my belt, I'd look at the stripes on my belt, knew that I wanted to go and kind of continue to go and advance, and it was this like dichotomy of like the pain of like just putting the thing on, because I was trained so much, my skin was literally like achy and sore, some days, and training twice a day, so a lot of times like I would wake up, eat something, um, you know, have a coffee, go to the gym, train, come home, eat something again, try to sleep a little bit, maybe take a nap, watch some TV, just like kind of like relax a little bit, do a little bit of work, whatever I had to go and do, and then I'd go back to the gym at night. And that second time, dragging myself there, like for that second workout at night, I think it was like that was some of the toughest experiences that I had too. Was like just, but it's so formative. And I remember like being in this environment amongst all of these, like the greats that are in this room, and some of the greatest competitors, the sport's ever seen, that I'm getting to train with every day. And I was like, man, like, it's just such a unique opportunity. It was absolutely incredible. And I just loved it. I loved every second of it. Even even the seconds I hated in hindsight, like it was just such a special time in life. It was it was wild. So for the first 6 months, I didn't submit anybody. I just survived. Like I literally just focused on survival, and I'm good at that, thankfully. I think with all the other things that I mentioned, I think that I was able to I think the training benefit that I gave a lot of my teammates there was the fact that I was really stubborn and difficult to submit, and would put them in positions where for them to go and actually get something on me, like they knew that they had earned it. And then eventually I turned a corner and I started submitting all kinds of people, like it was insane. And right around that point in time, um, I visited my old academy that I trained at before I came, which is an awesome place. It's a lot of friends there, good close friends with the founder of the gym. But it's not, they have the good competitors too locally, but they have good local competitors. They don't have good national and international competitors. And I could tell you, I mean, without a doubt, I learned that difference. I learned that difference big time of experiencing it and being in that environment, because I came back home and I started training with all these old people that I trained with before, and I just started smashing them. And to the point where I was like, wow, I was just I was floored with I didn't even necessarily realize how much I had improved. I think I think that sometimes there's the law of diminishing returns, right? You go and you'll struggle to see gains. Like they're not. You first start off, your gains are going to go through the roof, right? And then after a bit, it takes some take some time to see some significant time, and there might be cycles. It might be 3, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, multiple years, where you can see the up and down, the periodization, all of those aspects of things, to then really to see what can happen. And part of me wishes that I had just I decided after 2 years of losing at the Worlds in 2014, 2015, I decided to put the training on the back burner and focus on other things. That's when I got back into climbing, more active in the speaking world, more active in kind of promoting and things of that nature. So, part of me wishes that I'd stuck with it for sure. But you have to accept a different kind of, speed of life. I think, in a lot of ways, to be an athlete, a lot of times, especially, unless you're making it in the NFL or something like that, right? Like you're making a lot of money. It's a labor of love. You're doing it out of doing it for a lot of other reasons other than the fact of, getting paid.
It's hard also. Well, what's awesome is that you're surrounded by all those other great teammates out in San Diego, so you got better. So if you're the schlep in the room and you keep hanging, you're going to get better. If you're the smartest and the best athlete in the room, well, you're going to start diminishing, right? But you surround yourself with greatness. It's a lot easier to be great. What's very, very painful is that, like you said, early on, whether you're just touching a barbell for the first time or it's the first time you put on a gi, like every time you show up, you're having a PR. Like it's great for a few years, right? You start getting in that 90 percentile, 95 percentile. You start getting that 99 percentile. Mr. 3K, right? That's a 3,000 pound total. Hoff out of Westside. He'll train an entire year, increase his volume just to eke out an extra 5 pounds on his total squat bench deadlift. An extra 5 pounds, right? So now you're having to train twice a day, increase your volume just so you can get that much better. Volume starts going down, you start depreciating because you've done so much to get to that next level where you're like, shit, man, to get to that next level after that, how much more that's going to take, right? You don't just get there just because, well, I'm just keep doing the same things. Well, if I just keep doing the same things, I'm always going to be a 300 bencher. I'm never going to be a 500 bencher. You got to do more. Yeah, you can get smarter and get some nuances, but it just takes more at the high level. And after a while, you're like, it's kind of a grind, right? Kind of. It's all in grind. At that pro level, right? Whether it's MMA or the NFL, those guys, it's all day long. It's all day long. Prepping. Dude, squat bench deadlift over 3. Like you saw it at your jiu-jitsu guys' place and at Westside. That caliber of athlete, you got to be so all in, and everybody around you has to be all in because you're not getting there by yourself, training at home in the driveway. You're not getting in and just practicing your moves. You need to have all that adversity, plus the coach, plus the equipment, to push all that on you so that mentally and physically you can get better. That is brutal, like you said. And you're like, well, I'm going to kind of stop doing this. I'm going to start climbing 22,000-foot mountains. Oh, my goodness. And I know you met up with Jeff Gum a couple times. He was on the show, Navy SEAL. I saw him out in New York City, SEAL Swim. He wanted me to ask you.
Yeah, we actually
he had a question.
We actually lived together for a period of time and traveled the world together. So yeah, we spent a lot of time
That's
together.
what he said. Like you guys met up in Japan for a speaking engagement. Next thing you know, you visited like 40 companies or 20 countries in Europe. But he said he got stuck physically on the Great Barrier Reef, and he had to come down with a snorkel and save your life.
So it was I had a GoPro, and it was hooked to like an ankle strap,
Mm-hmm.
and it had like a cable cord, and there was a sea turtle, and I dove down, to try to go, but I had to expel most of my air to go and get close to the turtle to go and like get the GoPro shot. And I was like, oh, okay, then I gotta like go back up, right? I'm like trying to swim with the GoPro, and I hadn't really had that much practice with it. It was one of my first times using it, so like I dropped it to then swim back up, but it got lodged underneath this like kind of like a reef, like wedged in between these two pieces of reef, and so I felt it tug on my leg, and then like I like was out of air, but I'm still like a foot below the surface, and I was like, oh man, this is bad. So Jeff dove down, like grabbed it, and then swam back up. And he was like, that's why you don't leave home without your Navy SEAL bodyguard. Like, yeah, it's it was wild. There was actually a couple other times too on that trip, scuba diving, and a few other instances that were like, yeah, it's good to yeah, the bodyguard / hairdresser. That's what his like a official like business card was for a while.
Dang. Like I'm, like the new guy in the gym with the barbell. I'm the new guy in the pool swimming. Can you get fins on? Do you use those at all? Because that's really helpful. And if not, like I'm doing everything I can, and
Not
I have
so
longer
much,
levers
yeah.
to propel myself against the
I
water.
wish
But
I
I'm
could.
like, shit. I saw you swimming in when you were training too. I was like, that's gotta be tough.
So when I kick, I'll do like a freestyle stroke a lot, and like breaststroke, but like even like the direction when I go and kick, like my hips were never really like super strong, just because I've kind of always like in like a seated or like bear crawl position. So walking upright, even my way my hips were like shaped when I was a baby, were it was like it was just kind of a more natural position that I end up in. So it's yeah, so the fins and stuff like that never were able to get that figured out, but usually it's just like a litany of like bad ideas that I'll have myself, usually that involve like just trying to figure stuff out and a ton of like duct tape to go and try to like get stuff like get stuff to eventually like work. Like I said, with my climbing gear, when I first started, I was using bath towels like wrapped around my arms and my feet, and we'd like just cut up and rip up bath towels, and that was basically like what I used as a shoe. And then some amazing people came in and built like a custom carbon fiber shoe that I use.
But
So that ended up being like night and day comparison to what space age compared to the stuff that I was trying to figure out how to use on my own. I was trying oven mitts, pot holders, a lot of other stuff like that. That was like a good like prototype idea for a shoe. We cut up a mountain bike tire and kind of like made like a prototype model of it. But it wasn't until I had the people that actually knew what they were doing that came in with the carbon fiber that were able to actually make it work.
so you're just sitting there trial and error like I would be. Then you get some engineers saying, "Oh well, have you thought about this?" And you're like, "Well, no, because that's not me. I'm not an engineer." And made all the difference in the world. Was there like you've spoken all over the place? Is there any like a venue or event where you're like, man, I'm on the mountain. I'm on top of the mountain, metaphorically. I'm there. I've done this athletically, emotionally. Now I'm speaking to these folks. Was there a moment where you're speaking where you're like, one, holy shit, what did I get myself into? And then on the flip side, holy shit, I'm crushing it.
I would say it's happened. It's happened a few times, more than a few times for sure. Where my third speech that I ever gave, I was still 18 years old, and I've given probably close to 1,000 keynote talks at this point. And my third ever talk, I remember it was at a baseball stadium, and there was like it was the opening ceremonies for the Junior Olympics, is what it was actually. So there's about 15,000 people at this like baseball stadium, and it was my like third speech ever, and I was scared out of my mind. Um, but I remember like, just at that point, I would hide like a note card under my legs or like under my seat, like because I couldn't like stand up and use like a lectern to go and like have like a frame of reference, and I wasn't at a point where I could fill up like an entire hour without having some kind of cheat sheet. So I would just hide it underneath my leg, and I would just like sit there and like raise up my leg and like look at like whatever is next on the list of stories to go and tell. And that's basically all I did when I first started was um, just try to tell a story, make a point, tell a story, make a point regarding like different like experiences that I had kind of along the way. Whether it was early on, it was wrestling and football, some weightlifting stuff, and but then in the Q&As and all of that, like people would end up asking like a ton of different questions from different like different angles, different perspectives, all sorts of different things. So yeah, but I mean, there's to boardrooms to like like meeting with people that were multi-millionaires, billionaires, like super successful in business, like professional athletes at the SB Awards, like you mentioned at the beginning of the intro. There's moments where I just like look around where I was like, man, like, I can't believe that I'm here. Can't believe that like I made it. Especially as a kid too, with like all of those doubts and fears and concerns. To bring it back to some of the people that like I know that not everybody that's listening to this, right, that's like one of your athletes is going to make it to that next level statistically, but some of them
Mm-hmm.
are. Some of them are, and some of them are going to go and look around, and they're going to be in an environment where like holy smokes, like whatever it is that they're doing, where like those just some of the best moments in the world, where you're just like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe that I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing. But that's the nature of life. And then we kind of forget too, like, I think of how much struggle and bad like the difficult times are until we pick up something new that we're really bad at, and we remember how bad we were. All of a sudden, that's a good reminder. I got really into photography and videography, like I mentioned, like doing the GoPro stuff, and I was bringing around camera equipment when we were traveling a lot. And I remember I was just so frustrated with like figuring out like shutter speed and aperture and focus and like focusing on all the different stuff. For video too, for sound and the editing, all of that. Like just it was really frustrating to go figure out at first, and then once you finally like figure out and you get like a hang of it, then it was fun. But every time I think that you pick up a new skill and you go and do something, that you see like it could be just a reminder of like those times and other things, I think too, that like that weren't so easy when you started, but then all of a sudden you could be where you like just in a different place than you would have expected down the road, and it can happen to literally anybody too. I think that that's probably one of the most important aspects about my story is the fact that like I know I'm not even if I had arms and legs, I think I'd be a pretty good athlete, but I wasn't like a great athlete. Like for me, the work ethic was the like differentiator. That was the thing that like allowed for the biggest transformation. Staying after when my teammates would go home, I was like, what are you guys doing? Like there's still work to do, like we got to like go and do sprints or whatever, right? Like and like that mentality I think was what carried me a lot when I was younger, and it's something I need to go and get back to now too, more than anything. Is like just whatever's within your control to go and like to make it work. And I love seeing people that that do that and embody that. Dan Gable, an Olympic gold medalist wrestler, only lost one match in college and ended up becoming a Olympic gold medalist. But then as a coach at the Iowa Hawkeye wrestling team for 21 years, in 15 years out of the 21 years that he was there, he won a national title. It's unheard of in any sport. It's like one of the most ridiculous things, imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're just, in Penn State, Cale Sanderson, they're doing the same thing right now too. It's it's just it's wild to see. I think when people like are, have done they're just doing something that's, that you look at and you're like, wow, like it's special. I think about people too, like in football, Steve Atwater or somebody like that, like, or Jesse Tuggle. He was the middle linebacker for the Falcons. He was like 5'8".
Mm-hmm.
They ended up playing middle linebacker and like crushing people. When he was a hero of mine when I was a kid, and I remember getting to meet him, and it was me and my dad got invited to like the Falcons training camp, and then one of the games, and Jamal Anderson, Ray Buchanan, they gave me like game balls, and it was one of the coolest experiences of my life, of like standing on the field with those guys and like being there with them, and like uh, something I won't ever forget, like shaking Jesse Tuggle's hand, or watching like a Steve Atwater rip somebody's head off. I mean, those are two examples of people that like they weren't by any stretch of the imagination the biggest. They weren't the baddest. They just had the heart and the mind, and that's what carried them. And I think that's, it doesn't happen for everybody, but yet in some instances it can, and it can be that for you, but only if you're willing to do what it takes to see it through.
Yeah, one of the phrases we say is that it takes what it takes, and the problem when people get upset is because they've done, you know, this much work and they assume this much success, and sometimes this much work equates to less, and they're pissed because their expectations are off. And it just means that if they want this much success, it might take this much more work, and that's just the way it is. It just takes more, whether it's fair or unfair. There's plenty of unfairness, everywhere. What I like what you pointed out is that you had that mentality. If you were born differently, probably I would bet that you don't have the same mentality because you haven't had enough adversity to equate to that level of tenacity, right? You could be a hard worker and a doer, but you hadn't suffered enough like you have now to be like, well, shit, I've been through so many other things, like the volume alone of the struggle, right? But you point out that statistically, people that listen to the show and the kids and the adults they're not going to be playing in college. Like Lucas sees hundreds of kids. Some of them won't even go to college, let alone play, right? But if they learn to be active and healthy the rest of their life, if they learn to strain underneath the bar and handle adversity, they can do that more and more the rest of their life. Maybe they're working in a restaurant or wherever, they have that same transferable skill. Well, that's that impact. That's that your grandmother holding on to you on your shoulder or your elbow at the end, holding on to that impact. So when you can give them those examples and then push them and guide them to go through that and say, hey, this is that struggle that sucks, but next week when we talk about the same struggle, you're gonna be like, yeah, I can handle that. So you give them that context, and that's what you do and I do, and what Lucas definitely does. I know we could talk all on and on all night. Is there like one or are there 2 or 3 points when you would speak or talk to other folks and say, hey, if I can give you these 3 lessons, I know usually the title's like no excuses, which is huge, right? If you get that lesson alone, you're probably good. If you really believe no excuses, and you're probably good. You don't need to learn anything else. Was there 2 or 3 points where you're like, hey, here's my message. I'm trying to get the audience, this athlete, this team, this group of stockbrokers to learn these 3 things, 2 things, whatever. Then I made an impact on my speech. Is there anything like that for you? Like that was your plan?
Yeah, I would say so with like the no excuses, pick like just one thing
Mm-hmm.
at a time and hammer it. Whatever it is, like pick a weak point and like pick a weak point and do something about it. Everybody's got you always have a weak point, and you always have those like chinks in your armor. And I think it's it's nice. We like to focus on our strengths with things. We like to focus on the stuff that feels good, but like pick a weak point and hammer it. I think that's like it's going to make you better, even if it's like psychologically. It might be, it could be something fun, it could be something not so fun. It could be something that's a really difficult, really challenging thing to go and to do. It could be like a complete revamp of your nutrition or your lifestyle, or like how you do your recovery. Like, could be overcoming a drug addiction. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different things that it could be. That you personally know, like, okay, this is a weak point in my life right now that I need to go and handle. But I think it's gonna make you better, undoubtedly. The second, is like sometimes, like just the hilarity of like of a mantra. I think of like, so I learned this from the first ever Navy SEAL friend that I became that I was able to befriend. His name was Richard Makowitz, and he was on this he was on a Discovery Channel show called Future Weapons, and it was badass. He's like this, super intense, very intelligent, like a SEAL who was like also a radio talk show host from Texas, and just like he ended up passing for the same brain tumor that got my grandma when he was much younger. But he's just an amazing guy, and Mac was his name, Makowitz. He's also like a Zen Buddhist monk, so he's like kind of like both ends of the extreme. But his mantra was "Not dead, can't quit," and like he was the embodiment of that. Not dead, can't quit. And like when you're at like a broken point, you literally, that's like the baseline thought where you're like, you ask yourself, are you like, am I dead? Literally, if you're like physically like pushing yourself to the point where you're like asking yourself like, okay, I think I might die if I continue to go and push, and then you don't, or whatever. If you do, then you won't be there to go and answer that question, and so who cares? And then, but if you are there and you hear that voice, back, then you know that you're not dead. So you can't quit. So not dead, can't quit. And finally, last thing I would say is where the attention goes, the energy flows, right? So, it's, I think it's there's just in so many different things, right? Like where you put your attention and focus is like what's going to go and like lead to that like outcome. I'm like, this is this stupid, silly example, but like as a little thing, like I woke up this morning like feeling like like a cold congestion, like just like blah, and I'm sure that from the audio from this is probably like noticeable, but I'm like, if I put my attention and focus on that, like that's what I'm gonna feel like all day. And several times like throughout the day, I'd go and catch myself like my attention kind of like slipping into that area, right, where like and it's wild, like as I would slip into that, just like the brief victim mentality that comes with thinking about a head cold, it just changed my entire state, mood, all that stuff, right? Like physicality, like just like generally how I go and feel. If I take my attention and my focus, like cognitively, if I remove it from the head cold, I put it on another area, even kinesthetically, like in my body, whether it's like could be my chest or my back or like or my breath, anything from that, or like outside of myself, and just like thinking like, well, like looking around like in the beautiful like the woods and the nature and like the greenery and the trees. And then I'm like, it just it shifts it. So it's not like obviously a perfect fix, and there's some things that like might be extraordinarily painful that you have to deal with, that it might help 10%, 10 or 20%, but that 10 or 20% might be the edge that you need to be able to like actually like succeed. It might be the thing that you need to actually like make that breakthrough to be able to go and get to the other side and go and say like, no, like I can do this, and that's what it takes. Like that to me is like, that's how we figure out stuff. That's how we go and tap into that explored DNA that's written and embedded inside of all of us. It's written on every human heart. There's you mentioned the Teddy Roosevelt Man in the Arena. It's amazing. And when you're in that arena, though, you have to realize that it's just you that's in that arena. And like all of like you with your experiences, your unique gifts, everything that you have to go and bring to the table, good, bad, and different, whatever it is, it's just you in that arena. And you leave it all out there, and you go on about your business, and you go and focus on, moving on to that next thing, that next arena. There's always going to be that next thing. There's always going to be that next arena, no matter what it is, big, little, otherwise. And like where we put our focus, where we put our attention is what goes and like manifests in our life. That's what the secret is. That's what the law of attraction is. That's what like all of that stuff about, manifestation and all that stuff is. It's all true. It really is. But yet it's not like I'm going to go and like, wish and dream and hope and pray that like, there's going to be, $1 million that's going to go and show up in my mailbox, or a Lamborghini that's going to go and drive up like some people, go and bullshit other people with, and they make a ton of money doing it. It's ridiculous. It's like, look at these Lambos in my garage and like how cool I am, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's so fake. It's so funny though. And like, I think it's hilarious, but there's substantive truth, I think, in other things, in other regards, that like we can go and find from other people's arenas, other people's journeys, and like knowing for both of you to go and be here where you are right now, like, what it's taken to go and to get you here to this point, like a fraction of it, and vice versa. Right. But then we go and have that connection and that common ground, and we go and bring what it is that we, have, together. And I think that's like one of the greatest experiences of being alive. If you can fill yourself up with that stuff, that's putting your attention and focus on the things that, where it needs to be, and where not just where it needs to be, but like where it can be. I think where it like where it should be.
So I got
deal with that.
no excuses. Have some kind of funny mantra, but the mantra is still important because it kind of like guides you when you're struggling, right? Then you said you got some kind of weakness, just hammer it until it's addressed. And then where your focus goes, your energy flows. I'm watching a scary movie with my wife. She hates it. And she's freaking out. I go, are you freaking out because you're watching the movie? She goes, yeah. I go, well, in this one moment, just look at the plant on the wall over here. And she goes, what? Yeah, just look over at the plant. She goes, okay. Are you freaking out now? No? Well, then look at the plant. All right? This whole scene's going to be over with in a second. Right? Don't worry about it. Right? And if you're coming off the football field and you're getting ready to go on and you have a big play coming, it's fourth and whatever, and you're looking around and you're freaking out, right? Because you're focusing on stuff that doesn't really help you. You got to focus on, what is my play? What is my assignment? Do I have the people around me doing their thing? What is the process in this moment? What is my process for dialing in and focusing in this moment, right? Because my energy needs to go there. I start worrying about making a mistake. It's over. It's over, right? What were we going to say, Luke?
No, I was, coaching kids all day. That's one thing I like to say is pick and choose your battles wisely. Pick your battles, because if you go into it, for me, if I go into a day and, sometimes they're good days, sometimes they're bad days, sometimes the kids are high energy, sometimes, but if I'm always focused on the kids that are always unprepared, if I'm always focused on, the 20% and not the 80, it can usually, I can feel the kind of energy if I focus on the 20%, I can feel my own energy, and the energy that I give is based on that 20%. So a lot of times I have to remind myself to pick and choose my battles. Now, if a kid is not like doing something with great technique, that's different. But if a kid is, not prepared or blah, 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 any excuse, any reason, if I'm always honed in on that, then that's what my day is going to be about. And that's what I'm going to be focused on instead of the 80% that's trying to get better. So it's relatable for me whenever you say that. So it's extremely relatable to me. So it's just,
Gotcha. Love it. Man, Kyle, I had a great time. So I have these rapid fire questions. So this should be quick. Just what comes to mind. When you're training, what do you listen to?
Like I mentioned, so probably half the time music, like I listen to like rock most part, and then like the other half is like I'll listen to something like a podcast, like Joe Rogan podcast or something like that.
You might want to check out that Athlete Builder podcast if you really want to get better. Just saying.
Oh, I've heard about this. Yeah, I heard about that.
Done a lot of places, done a lot of things. Is there a bucket list adventure you haven't done yet that you want to do still?
Wow, so many. Yeah, I mean, I mean,
Unbreakable Athletics, right?
it,
Come over to the gym in
whew,
Indiana, Plainfield.
that added to the list. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've gotten to do a lot. Skydiving, surfing. I get to retrace the steps of the Spartans with actually Jeff Gum was on that trip, um, and
His life seems so fun. I kind of hate him right
so
now. Goodness, he's having such a he's
he's got
God Almighty, just having the summer time.
he's figured out like a very interesting niche.
Yes.
It's swimwear line, and like he's like he's just a fascinating individual. There's only one Jeff Gum in the world, that's for sure.
So is there no adventure, one you haven't done yet? You're like, I definitely want to do this.
I have nothing on the list right now that comes to mind. I think like doing like some endurance related stuff like Ironman or something like that down the road would be very cool. I've got like a adapted bike that I used to go across Greece when we did the Spartan walk. Uh, but the Yeah, I've got another friend that's trying to talk me into doing some Spartan races too right now. So that would be on the list potentially. Not really sure. I think a lot of that stuff, what I've said more than anything, especially dealing with the TBI. I think it's literally like right now like focusing more than anything on just like health and longevity and like looking at things in shorter time increments than I think that I would have looked at like previously.
Okay.
And that's I don't think that's okay though. I think it's just taking things kind of day by day.
Favorite sports movie?
So probably if you consider it sports, boxing. I love boxing movies. Rockies for sure. The Rocky
Mm-hmm.
movies I think are probably my favorites. Also, uh, Miracle, a hockey movie about I think it was
1980.
81, 1980. Yeah, I had to give a speech with Mike Ruzioni one
Jeez,
time.
that's
That
cool.
was very cool. Yeah, no, hear his perspective on about that journey was pretty wild.
The movie Gladiator. Most people think of the Roman movie, right, with Russell Crowe. But
Oh
there's a
yeah,
Gladiator.
is that considered a sports movie
Not really,
too?
but there's a
Kind of. I mean, it was in the day,
it
right?
sure was life and death. But there's a boxing movie called Gladiator with Cuba Gooding Jr. I don't know if you've seen that one or not, but that's a pretty good boxing movie. It's pretty obscure. Not a lot of people have seen it.
Huh? No, I haven't.
Favorite athlete to watch?
I would say,
We listed some good ones there.
yeah, Dan Gable. I mentioned Cale Sanderson.
Yep.
When they were like just like watching them do their thing as coaches and as athletes, like I think pretty incredible. My jiu-jitsu professor Andre Galbao, and Marcelo Garcia, who's a friend in New York, the Gracie family, I think, also as well. Some of my favorites. Seeing I got to go to Randy Couture's locker room when I was so he was the UFC champion back in like the early like mid 2000s and like dominant for so many years, heavyweight champion, light heavyweight champion, and was with him like moments before he stepped into the cage. I was with Forrest Griffin, one of my old teammates, when he won the UFC title, beat Rampage Jackson. He was 10 feet from the cage when that happened, so it was very, very cool. Some of the nicest people in the world too. I mean, they're savages, but they're absolutely like some of the best, like kindest people you'll ever meet.
I never met Dan Gable. Always wanted to. I read both of his biographies. It's even shocking. He's his family experienced tragedy as well. His sister was murdered, and he had to overcome that, but no arguing with his approach and tenacity. Favorite book?
So it's got to be 100% Empire of the Summer Moon. It's so the history of the Comanche Indians, and it follows the life of the last great Comanche chief before they kind of like he was the one that eventually surrendered and marched the people into the reservation. But it was like they're at a point where like they had to. They were beat, facing extermination, and so his like upbringing, journey, and struggle kind of like follows that, and like shows like the 100-year history of the Comanches. Which the fascinating thing about them, so the Comanche, they were in Texas, Oklahoma, and Nevada areas, and like some parts of Mexico, and they were brutal, savage. Like they were known for like they'd be the guy that had the most brutal in their warfare, but also like super loving and like family oriented, and they were nomadic and would bring their villages around different places. But they started out as slaves to the Spanish, as like they were the Spanish like would basically like held them in captivity, where they would use them as like their like horse people, and that they became so good at like horse related skills and horse riding, um, they became like masterful. And eventually, when the Spanish left and vacated, they left thousands of these Spanish Mustangs that the Comanche just like scooped up and kept. And then like they went from like being like they were like the small puny tribe, and to being like the most dominant tribe and of all the North American Indian tribes. And it was like worst to first, to the point where they didn't lose a battle for over 100 plus years.
Right.
And their mentality with stuff was just remarkable. They would do like they would ride like 400 plus miles in a day. They'd take two horses with them. One horse would die. They'd jump off. Like they would cut out the dead horse's stomach and drink the contents of the dead horse's stomach for like and like sometimes before they would go into battle. Like it was, they were just like just because one of those things, like just because like it was like they'd like made every aspect of their warlike culture. It was like an artistry. So I think that like the kind of union of that like ferocity and the artistry, but then seeing too what they had to go through, that like the intensity of the struggle to like to surrender and march their people on a reservation. That was and seeing what Quanah Parker, the last Comanche chief, what he went through, in that whole process. And and after too, when the life of the reservation and what he did to trying to fight for his tribe, and at that point with civil rights and other things like that, like it was just a fascinating story. So I can't recommend it enough. Empire of the Summer
Got it.
Moon.
Favorite superhero? Could be fictional, could be nonfiction.
So there's a bunch. I'm a huge like fan of all the different superhero movies, but I would say if I had to pick one, it'd be
All right.
X-Men for sure.
Favorite villain?
Magneto, definitely. I would say like his like complication, and like also to the like nature of his relationship, I think, with Professor X, like in the history there, I think it was one of my favorite stories.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite quote?
Probably, I would say the mantra that I said earlier, the "not dead can't quit." It's like I think that's probably it. There's also an Emerson quote: "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail." That I've always loved. Um, but I think the Mackwitz, yeah, "not dead can't quit."
Like it.
I think is it's it's helped me in several moments where I thought that I was broken and done, and I think about that, and I'm like, nah, I can keep going.
Awesome. So where can people find you if they're looking to connect?
So I'm not too super active in social media. Never really been a huge fan of it. But it has its place, it has its purpose for sure. Instagram is where I posted the most content for people to go and look back on. It's at Kyle Maynard. And YouTube, I think, is probably the best thing if people want to go and learn more about my story and whatnot, or like, like to be able to have like a visual frame of reference. Like I talked about, like, whether it's, wrestling or weightlifting, mountain climbing, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. Like, for people you can type in Kyle Maynard into YouTube, and see a bunch of different videos that people have put together over the years.
Awesome. Plus, you have your own website, kyle-maynard.com, right? So if people want to get a hold of you for work. For those that are looking to contact the show, we're at info@athlete-builder.com. And did not disappoint, Kyle, for our 1-year anniversary for our show, man. It was a great time. I was looking forward to it, learned a lot of things. And man, thanks for being on. It's been quite the gift. I really enjoyed it, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, likewise, Jim. Thank you so much. And Lucas, too. Nice to meet you as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys.